Wael El-Koshiri is homeschooling his 4th grade daughter.
Treehouse, 2 words.
After he says the public schools in Montgomery County, Maryland, infringed on their Muslim faith. The teachings he objects to involve classroom readings of books like these, featuring stories with gay, lesbian, and transgender themes.
They were love stories. So it was not just exposure to LGBTQ characters. We're talking specifically about family life and sexuality issues where some kids aren't really prepared to learn about these things.
The United States Supreme Court will soon decide whether public schools have to provide an opportunity for religious parents to opt their children out of school lessons that pertain to sexuality or information about the LGBTQ community. So for context, what is this case about? How did this case develop? Well, it all kind of started with the Montgomery Public Schools. They expanded their English language arts curriculum back in 2022 to include books with LGBTQ+ characters as part of an effort to better reflect the diversity of families in the country's or county's religiously diverse and politically liberal population. So there is a list of mandatory books or books that teachers are told to use during this instruction. 2 of the books kept coming up during the Supreme Court hearing on this. One of them was Uncle Bobby's Wedding, which is about a girl who finds out that her favorite uncle is getting married to another man. And then there's Love, Violet, which tells the story of a young girl who has a crush on her female classmates. Now, I think the age of the students that would be, consuming this content or these books is important here, right? We're not talking about high school students or middle school students. The students are in 4th grade and 5th grade, which, as you can understand, led to some parents having concerns about it. But this isn't an attempt to ban the books. This is about giving parents the ability to simply opt their children out of the lessons in which these types of books are being utilized. And so basically the school system, I should say, Montgomery Public Schools in Maryland, initially did give the parents the opportunity to opt their children out. But then they reneged, and that's what led to this lawsuit against the school district. So Montgomery County is an extreme outlier, according to the lawyer representing the parents, in this case, the plaintiffs, insisting that every elementary school student must be instructed that, among other controversial matters, doctors guessed at their sex when they were born, and that anyone who disagrees is hurtful and unfair, said Eric Baxter, senior counsel for the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. And so after the parents were told, yeah, you can't opt your kids out of this, a coalition of parents from a variety of religious backgrounds. This isn't just some far right Christian group that's trying to ban books. There are Muslim parents who are concerned about this, obviously Christian parents as well. So this coalition got together and started protesting what the school district was doing, and then 3 couples and the organization Kids First ended up suing. So this case makes its way up to the Supreme Court, and just recently the Supreme Court heard arguments both for and against allowing parents to opt their children out. All right, so that's the context. Now let's talk about what happened during the hearing, because I thought there were some really interesting moments you should know about. So Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Samuel Alito, so a liberal and a conservative, sparred over the very nature of the books that were used or will be used and whether they're controversial or inappropriate, specifically for elementary school kids. Let's take a look.
Is there any affidavit from any parent that merely looking at people getting married, holding hands, none of them are even kissing in any of these books? The most they're doing is holding hands.
Before we move away from the book that Justice Sotomayor was referring to, Uncle Bobby's Wedding, I've read that book as well as a lot of these other books. Do you think it's fair to say that all that is done in Uncle Bobby's Wedding is to expose children to the fact that there are men who marry other men?
No, Your Honor, and this court in Obergefell promised that parents would be able to continue to teach what this court called decent and honorable beliefs, that same-sex marriage is immoral according to their beliefs. And it's a far stretch from that for schools to compel students to attend. Parents are paying taxes. They have to pay at threat of criminal fines or penalties or the expense of private school. And then to have teachers telling them things that are directly contrary to their beliefs.
Yeah, the book has a clear message. And a lot of people think it's a good message, and maybe it is a good message, but it's a message that a lot of people who hold on to traditional religious beliefs don't agree with.
So Justice Alito, he's making an argument in regard to religious beliefs, yes. But put that aside, because I think what he's also touching on that's really relevant to the arguments being made here is the fact that it's not just simply that these books have characters that happen to be gay. It's that they have an overarching message that, pushes acceptance or acceptance toward gay marriage or whatever that religious folks have issues with. And so it's the nature of the books that Alito feels that, the liberal justices are just kind of minimizing. Whereas in reality, these books bring up some issues in regard to ideology, right? In regard to pushing a certain take on gay marriage. Now look, I'm 100% in favor of gay marriage. I have absolutely no problem with gay marriage. And if I had children, I would not have a problem with them consuming that type of material. I think there's nothing wrong with these books. Let's just put it that way. I would be deeply, deeply concerned if this were a situation in which the religious parents were trying to be the arbiters of what all the students can learn. But that's not what's happening here. They're not calling for the banning of these books from the school district. They're not calling for the banning of this type of curriculum in the school district. They're simply saying, these are our sincerely held religious beliefs. These are the books that are being used for our kids in 4th grade and 5th grade. We're not ready to broach these conversations with our kids yet. And we're not comfortable with them learning about these things yet, especially when it butts up against our religious beliefs. So we'd just like to opt our kids out. And the school district's like, nah, it's too difficult for us to do. I don't agree with the school district on that, to be honest with you, because while I'm not religious, I think it's important to protect religious liberty in this country. You want public schools, which are funded by everyone and they're universally available for everyone, to be a welcoming environment for people of all faiths, all beliefs. And if there are, very narrow situations in which the lesson plan, butts up against religious beliefs, I think that parents should have the ability, especially in elementary school, to opt their children out. So, but there's more, because surprisingly, this is really surprising. Justice Elena Kagan, who's a liberal justice, seemed to agree with Samuel Alito in regard to the nature of the book. So let's take a look at that.
I want to take you back to some of the questions that Justice Alito was asking, because I too was struck by these are young kids, picture books, and on matters concerning sexuality. I suspect there are a lot of non-religious parents who weren't all that thrilled about this, and then you add in religion, and that's even more serious.
So, she's acknowledging, yeah, the material here is sensitive material, it's sexual in nature, and even if you're not a religious parent, you might not be thrilled with your 4th grader or 5th grader reading these types of books or looking at the images in these books as part of the elementary school curriculum. But I should note that Kagan also has a problem with the potential slippery slope nature of allowing parents to opt out of certain lesson plans. So Kagan worried about the sweeping implications of a Supreme Court ruling that gives parents a broad right to pick and choose across the school curriculum. Once we say something like what you're asking us to say, she told the lawyer for the parents, that's Eric Baxter, it will be like, opt-outs for everyone. So she's making a slippery slope argument, which gives you a sense of where her decision is likely to head in for the ultimate ruling for this, but the conservative justices, as we all know, outnumbered the liberal justices. So they seem poised to allow parents to opt out. Now, conservative justices repeatedly pressed Alan Schoenfeld, who is the lawyer for the school system, on why the school system can't be accommodating to parents who just want to opt their kids out of these lessons. Let's take a look at how that went down.
Well, the plaintiffs here are not asking the school to change its curriculum. They're just saying, look, we want out. Why isn't that feasible? What is the big deal about allowing them to opt out of this? Why can't this all be put? We're going to read Uncle Bobby's Wedding and these other books, but we're going to read it during a period of time that includes the health class, and children are already able to opt out of that, so they can opt out of reading these books.
I think there's no constitutional obligation to treat these books that introduce people to LGBT characters in a curriculum that is meant to teach about different matters.
I'm not understanding why it's not feasible. The county had an opt-out, you said. Every other school board in the country has opt-outs for all sorts of things. The county has opt-outs for all sorts of things. The other Maryland counties have opt-outs for all sorts of things. And yet for this one thing, they changed in mid-year and say no more opt-outs. I'm just not understanding feasibility.
So based on that line of questioning from the conservative justices, the legal experts who have weighed in on this hearing have predicted that by the summertime, the Supreme Court is very likely going to rule in favor of the plaintiffs here. Those are the parents who want the ability to opt out of these very specific lessons. But look, one final thing that I'll say is, I gotta give conservatives credit because they were right in a different prediction that they made all the way back in 2008. And what was that prediction? Well, at that time, the country was debating the idea of legalizing gay marriage, which didn't get legalized until years later. But nonetheless, one of the arguments that conservatives kept making was they want to teach your elementary school kids about gay marriage. And everyone on the left accused them of just fear-mongering. But now it seems like they want to teach elementary school kids about gay marriage, which again, I personally wouldn't have a problem with if I had children, right? But I know that a lot of parents would have a problem with that. And I do think that it's okay to give them an opportunity to opt out of those very specific lesson plans if there really is a violation of their sincerely held religious beliefs.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.